Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumper, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I am talking with Tanya Henderson and Steve Endow, two Dynamics ERP veterans who I first met when they were working primarily in the GP space. They've now transitioned much of their focus over to Dynamics 365 Business Central, where they have also teamed up on a new software venture, Dragonfly. They tell me about what it has been like getting into Business Central, their experiences with both the community and with the Microsoft team behind the product, the decision to start their new venture, some details about the products that they are launching, and how they plan to move ahead with the business in 2023. Tanya Henderson, Steve Endow, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, first time for having both of you. But Steve, I actually, Tanya, I was pretty sure you hadn't been on the podcast before, but then I had to go back and search my memory, Steve. You were on like episode 50 or so back 5 years ago.
Wow. I vaguely recall it was a long time ago, and I can't remember any details.
Yeah, it was well, I'll tell you, it was GP focused. It was, I didn't either. So to be totally honest with you, but yeah, it was back in June of 2017, and maybe we'll put a link, maybe not. I don't know how relevant it is. I thought it's somewhat relevant, I guess, because I did want to talk to both of you because you kind of share some interesting, I guess, characteristics of your careers and obviously differences, but I thought it'd be great to just record this and learn a little bit more, have our readers learn a little bit more about what you both do, where you've come from, and where you see things going in the channel and your own careers as well. Tanya, maybe we could just have you give a bit of an introduction to start things off.
I can. So my name is Tanya Henderson, and I was in the GP space. I guess I'm still in the GP space for pretty much about 23 years is what I've been doing. I was a project manager for a software company, and that was kind of had gone public, and you know how companies go when they go public. So not all of them were great. So I kind of left that company, and that's how I started being a GP consultant, because I used to research accounting software for that particular company. So did GP, Power BI. I went down the project accounting world. My very first project I ever did on GP was project accounting and small business financials, if you guys remember that lovely product.
Wow.
I had to get certified on that.
Before my time.
That was like my first day. He said, here, take this and learn it and get certified. So I did that for a lot of years. I switched over to BC about 5 years ago, I would say. It's been a while. I've been speaking at Directions pretty much for most of my career on BC. I love the product, so it's kind of an easy switch. So that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't realize you'd been with Business Central that long. When you started, trying to think back, was it Business Central already? Was it Nav at that point, or?
No, it was Madeira, actually.
Madeira, yeah, and then like Dynamics 365 Financials or something like that for a little while. Right. It quickly moved through quite a few iterations in those days.
Yes. And then it had I call it its white phase, where they tried to white label it.
Right. Oh, yeah, that was a short-lived one.
That was very short-lived.
Yeah. And Steve, I mean, just to kind of work in your history at the same time, you were still pretty much committed to GP, as I recall, as those sorts of stages of the Nav to Business Central sort of, transformation were going on.
Yeah, I'd been working with GP since 2004, I believe, and I was with a partner, went independent at 2007, and I was aware of Business Central and Madeira and its various iterations, but it was still pretty, it was pretty early days back then. And so I didn't really get serious with it until 2019. I attended Directions NA, attended a workshop by Waldo on setting up, Business Central and Docker containers. And so by the end of 2019 is when I started seriously, dedicated a couple weeks in December to figuring out, okay, how do you get involved in this? How do you set up Business Central and Docker? And it was still kind of early, so there were some rough edges back then. But yeah, pretty much late 2019 for me.
Mm-hmm. And so now, Tanya, you mentioned you still keep some of your time dedicated to GP. Is that right? How would you say that breaks down at this point?
Yeah, so I would say I don't necessarily keep some of my time dedicated to it, but I have those customers who, because project accounting, I always say I think I can count on one hand how many project accounting people were really in the space. And so I get a lot of project accounting work. I get lots of referrals for that.
All right.
So.
All right. And maybe to tie this conversation together for our listeners, before we go too far, is that you both also work together, right? So you've collaborated, you've actually done some business endeavors together on the Business Central side. Is that right?
Yes. Do you want to explain, Tanya, or do you want me to go?
Well, after Steve attended that directions that he was talking about, we were sitting and I will never forget this. We were sitting, I think it was actually December 3rd. We're almost at our anniversary, Steve. And we were sitting at a conference, and it was a very small conference. I think it was a Power Platform conference, I believe is what it was. In San Diego. And we were sitting outside, and I was feeling like I was overworked. And Steve was telling me how much he worked.
Or how little.
How little he worked. And we kind of just started talking, and we continued to talk. And we decided that we both wanted to go down the BC route. And I was obviously on the consultant side. He was on the development side. So I would say we just continued those conversations, and one day said, hey, let's start a business.
Yeah, and we got together, figured out what we wanted to do, and that is focus on software development as, say, application development in the ISV space for Business Central. And so we incorporated, formed a business, got a logo, an email, and off we went.
Yes.
Right. So it was sparked at it.
Put a website together too. Don't forget, Steve. We did that.
Yes, and to kind of like inform the listeners, the company that we created is called Blue Dragonfly, and we've been asked several times, like, why did you come up with that name? And it is because when we were talking about this, I explained my thoughts to Tanya. I said, I do not want to be Consolidated Business Systems Incorporated, right? Or Systems Consultant Inc. There are so many of those names in our space that, it's a very generic name. So I pulled from kind of my observation of the movie and television industry. And if you ever watch the end credits of TV shows or movies, they have some of the most clever names, like Red Wagon Productions. And you're like, how did you come up with that? But they come up with really just bizarre random names. And I'm like, well, if Hollywood can do it, why can't we? What is the rule in the business world that says you have to have a boring business name? So we went back and forth with dozens and dozens of names, and we settled on Blue Dragonfly that we thought was pretty cool. So
I like that. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's, some of those TV and movie production names go kind of off the rails too.
Completely. Totally wild. And I kind of don't want to know where some of those names.
It's a great name, and it's like you said, it definitely is. It's sort of wholesome because it is real words with real sort of things you can envision. It's
very visual, and we have some great little stickers and pins that we hand out at conferences. Right. We were just in Directions EMEA and handed those out, and they were a big hit. So it's a lot of fun having a, kind of a neat, clever, different logo.
Yeah. I think I got my hands on one of those pins at Directions EMEA, which is a great segue because I think that's where I last touched base with both of you and sort of heard what was going on. Well, tell me a little more about Blue Dragonfly. What kind of development are you doing? Are you launching your own products? Are you collaborating, partnering with other firms?
Sure. And Tanya, jump in at any time. Yep. So we are developing our own products. So we want to have our own software that we own, clear intellectual property ownership. I have been, and for background, I have been selling and supporting ISV solutions in the GP space, Dynamics GP space, since 2012, roughly. No, 2009, actually. So for the last 13 years, I've been selling and supporting small utilities for Dynamics GP. And I still support over 650 Dynamics GP customers right now. So that is kind of my day job. And based on my experience over the last decade in that space, I looked at the consulting world, which I've been doing for years, and it is a tough gig. You're working, you're selling your time and your body and have to be there and be on calls or be on site. And it can get exhausting. Whereas in the ISV space, you can have software sales and renewals or subscriptions or whatever your model is that is disconnected from the physical labor and time that you put in. And I realized, wow, this is pretty nice. I very much prefer this over the being on the clock and entering timesheets and recording hours and, having to be on the clock in order to make revenue. And there's only so much you can scale your time, right? So I can work 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week in order to increase my revenue. But at some point, I'm going to, wipe myself out there. Whereas in the ISV space, I can become more efficient. I can reduce my support costs, reduce my sales costs, improve the software, and I can scale through technology to have more and more customers that I can support. So my colleague and I, my colleague Andrew in Australia, we support 650 customers, just the two of us, no employees, no office, completely remotely. And it's been very successful for us. So that's the story that I told to Tanya. I said, hey, I'd rather work 4 hours a day. And even if my income is slightly less, I'd rather do that and have extra capacity than work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, regardless of how much money I make. So that was the choice that I made. And that apparently sounded appealing to her. So that's why we went and started Blue Dragonfly.
Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, Tanya, this is your first product company?
This is my first product company. I've always been, yes, on the services side. So I'm definitely pretty excited about it. Obviously, I've done a lot with the other ISVs, so have a lot of experience with that. Just not having the experience of actually being on the side of that, other than when I was a project manager and I was on, like I said, I was a project manager for a business portal actually many, many years ago. So I was a QA tester for our product then. So not in the GP space, but in another space, I was in the development side, not a developer though. I always say that I'm not the developer for sure.
Well, what's next for the company? Do you have any specific plans you can talk about or announcements or anything?
Yes, we have a product in the Business Central AppSource. It is Blue Dragonfly Recurring Billing. And it came from a couple of different needs. One is that I currently use QuickBooks Online to handle the hundreds of customers that we service in the GP space. And a lot of people instinctively try to criticize QuickBooks, but for $50, $55 a month, it is a staggeringly capable product. And one of the things it has that Business Central does not have out of the box is a fully automated recurring subscription billing system. So I set up an invoice. I say I want to bill annually on this date, 45 days in advance, send it to this customer. It just sends the invoice. I don't have to think at all. I don't have to configure anything extra. They also have a payment portal so the customer can pay online. So it is a very, very low cost, phenomenally smooth working system that they have. So I talked to Tanya. I said, hey, Tanya, I would really like to have something similar in Business Central. And there are kind of a few small pieces of that functionality, but it is not a comprehensive solution. And there may be some third-party products that offer similar functionality, but they tend to be much larger, more comprehensive. They have all sorts of other functionality that makes it more complex or more expensive than what I want, similar to QuickBooks. And the use case, for example, would be a Business Central partner. If I sell Business Central to 20 customers, I want to bill those customers monthly, quarterly, annually. that's what our software does. It's recurring billing, subscription billing, that type of billing system where you set it up, it automatically issues the invoice on the scheduled basis. And so that's what we're building to solve that need. And also, it's something we're going to need to sell and bill for our own software. So we figured we'd build our own product that we're going to use internally, and we're working with Business Central partners to offer that solution to them as well.
And so the way that we kind of work together is I will usually come up with something that's a customer asked me for, and I will go to Steve, and he's a very good at walking me through, what is, okay, Tanya, you got to really get to step back and think about this. Is this really good for the market? Is this really going to be something that's needed in the space? Do we think Microsoft is going to build it? So, all of those going back and forth, we do that a lot.
That's kind of the fun part, I think, of product development.
It is, except when he says no. I don't like that
part. and so that it's a really difficult challenge. Tanya and I have talked about people who we've had conversations, and people say, "Oh, I'm just going to build this AppSource app and make money, and everything's going to be great." Well, it's a lot harder than that. I've developed other products that I thought were technically fantastic. We received a collective yawn from the customers. They're like, "Why would I buy this?"
Mm-hmm.
And we're just stumped. Like, don't you see the functionality? They're like, "Yeah, but why would I use your product when I could spend 15 minutes bumbling through the system doing it manually?" And it was a real eye-opener that technical value or the value that we think we're offering may not be perceived as valuable in the marketplace. And for instance, we talked about a lot of products where Tanya says, this is a really difficult problem that customers have that we'd like to solve. And so my challenge is, well, how can I solve it, right? Like, if we need to deal with 5 more dimensions in Business Central and populate that all over the place, it starts to get pretty difficult. So at some point we say, well, yes, we might have 10 or 20 customers. Does that justify the development effort required to get this product to market? And so we're having those conversations constantly.
However, another side of the business is essentially doing the per-tenant extensions as well. And we have done multiple per-tenant extensions. And keep in mind, we were not in the nav space, right? And so in the nav space, that was very popular. Everybody had an extension. So we essentially have done one, I would say, was more robust. And Steve, you can kind of elaborate on it too, if we want to talk about that one, is that we will take, needs of customers and essentially build out exactly what it is that they're looking for, so that, maybe it's something we can sell in the future, maybe it's not, but we're kind of essentially somewhat getting it funded and then may build on that. And I definitely see that. We had a product that was called a burden tool, and there's a payroll ISV that actually has it built into the payroll. And I have used that, and I teach that solution. But that piece of it, not a lot of customers use payroll, right? Everybody wants to outsource their payroll. So we took that burden piece and built it for a customer. And Steve, if you want to elaborate on that particular solution.
Yeah, and so I think Tanya and I have discussed that we are open to working with customers to develop solutions for them to meet their particular needs, because it keeps us open to what is really going on at customer sites. I think there are some niches in the ISV community that they've been selling their product for so long that they may have lost touch with how things are changing in the customer environment. And so we always want to be in the trenches dealing with the real world customer problems. And this is an interesting one, although I would think it's obscure, but Tanya tells me it's a fairly common need, that when you're working with the jobs, you need to account for these overhead elements such as payroll taxes and expenses and things that aren't automatically accounted for when you're billing for project work. It's like, oh, okay. And it turns out it's pretty detailed stuff, right? We had to spend hours working with the customer to understand, how does this work when you have projects in 7 states with 250 employees who are on and off the job, and you have these different contracts with different customers. Capturing all of that information, performing the calculations automatically to record burden to a job, it got fairly detailed. But in the end of the day, we were able to pull together a system that is native to BC and automatically calculates for this, everything for this customer, saving them, I mean, endless
Hours.
hours. I can't imagine they could do this manually. It would be a
Yeah, they do it
nightmare.
in Excel, I think, manually. They've done it in Excel manually, and it's not as detailed as what we have done for them, essentially.
Right.
Interesting. Boyce, you're taking on some of these challenges at such an interesting time in the Business Central sort of evolution, I guess you would say, especially with all the work that's gone into, getting AppSource to the point it's at from Microsoft's perspective, and, all the changes that they've rolled out regarding how partners sell BC, and now there's, even new commerce capabilities coming finally on the AppSource side, supposedly.
Right.
Have you been keeping your eye on how all these different things have been evolving, or maybe has there been like one or two that you really wanted to see get to a certain maturity point before you both sort of stepped into this space and really committed to the effort that you put in?
I have a few thoughts, Tanya.
Yeah, I would say, and I'm thinking you're asking, like, when did we really decide to jump into the BC space, and did we trust Microsoft?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I just have always felt I would say when the directions start, or when directions really started, or when I started seeing it, I guess is more likely, because it's been around for a very long time. I just kind of felt like I saw the writing on the wall. They talked about combining, F&O, GP, and Nav all together so they could do a cloud solution. I felt like Microsoft was going to do a cloud solution, right? And they made that commitment to do that cloud solutions. And I would say, probably, like I said, 3-4 years ago, I really started learning it, and I loved the product, and I just felt like it was going to take off. And Steve kind of, I think, probably in that 3-year mark, kind of felt the same way.
Yeah, it seemed pretty clear to me that the investment in Dynamics GP was slowing down, and the investment in Business Central was just, going through the roof. So it seemed pretty clear. And once I started looking into the capabilities of Business Central and the technical features, the development tools, the new architecture, very, very modern stuff in many respects, it was like an entire new world of learning and opportunity for me, and from an ISV perspective. And so I thought there was great opportunity there. But as you hinted to, Jason, there were some challenges. So I want to be an AppSource. Well, how do I bill my customers for that? Microsoft did not have a mechanism for that. And so, okay, you got to build that yourself. Well, that's kind of daunting. So I kind of put it off and thought, well, maybe we need to wait for Microsoft. But then once Tanya and I started working together, we said, well, we just need to move forward. We can't wait for Microsoft to make that happen. And even if they do provide that, which they're working on, it may not fit our licensing model, right? It may not be flexible enough. Or, as we have since learned, if you just happen to lose access to your partner account, you could lose access to your revenue. And that is a problem we encountered. We lost access to our partner account due to a technical issue for 9 weeks? We couldn't do anything. We couldn't get to AppSource. We couldn't publish a new version. We couldn't check our partner status. And it took 9 weeks to get that resolved. So that was a good lesson. And we learned that we cannot have that reliance on Microsoft for our revenue. So we have since developed our own licensing and registration and billing system. So, we've, based on our hard lessons, we've gone a particular direction. Other partners and ISVs are going different directions, and, depending on their needs, that makes sense.
Maybe this isn't relevant, but I know, like, on the development side for for applications and customizations, Microsoft's put more rules in place around the standards for, basically development standards, right? For how you customize, how you extend the base application. Steve, maybe there's a question for you, but have those changes, have those like kind of made you more comfortable with the product? Have any of those changes in the last 6 months or a year been really important with your ISV hat on here?
I actually have a slightly different perspective. In terms of AppSource, my understanding and our experience submitting our app is that the standards have actually decreased. And the challenge, understandably, for Microsoft is they cannot manually review every submission anymore. That manual review process simply does not scale. So they have implemented some automated checks. They have dropped several requirements. So there was a prior requirement for automated testing, and they called it code coverage. You had to have so much code coverage in your automated tests in order to pass. My understanding is that requirement is no longer present. So as a result, I have seen and tested ISV solutions from AppSource that simply do not work. They somehow got past the technical validation, got into AppSource. We installed it to check it out, and we found bugs that prevented the app from even functioning. And we know exactly what they did wrong. We see the error message. Somehow that got through. So Microsoft's in a difficult situation. I don't fault them. If they want to have thousands of apps in AppSource that get processed in an automated fashion, they cannot be the babysitter, the code police, and making sure everyone is doing everything perfectly and properly. So that's a challenge I think we're going to see. And Tanya and I have discussed this. We're going to see some bugs in AppSource, and that does happen. That's reality. But we're going to see some apps in AppSource that probably aren't the best and are not maintained. And that's one critical difference with Business Central SaaS or Business Central Online and AppSource. Every month you have a new incremental release. Every 6 months you have a new major release. The ISVs have to maintain their solution. If they do not, it will stop working at some point. And I've found some solutions that's occurred with, and I don't know how Microsoft's going to manage it. So, in order to scale, they've had to loosen requirements, and I'm kind of guessing we're going to see the fallout of that in the next 6 to 18 months.
I feel like I say I'm the lucky consultant sometimes, because Steve and our other developers, Steve's pretty specific about things. And as you know, if you follow him on Twitter, he will find stuff and post it all the time. And I think it's a great quality, because I feel like we're building our business, even though we may do a little bit slower. We're not pumping out, 10 apps every week. But the nice thing about it is he's building the products we're building those products together, so that we're not having to have as much support on the back end, or we're having a lot of automated testing, automated notifications to let us know that, hey, this next version is not going to be compatible for X, Y, and Z reason. So that's why I feel like I'm super lucky, because I have people on the development side who are very detailed, which I think is awesome.
It makes me think of the fact that with these uncertainties that are very hard to get rid of, like you said, Steve, I mean, there's this difficult balance, but it just makes me think that relationships and sort of other ways of building trust in an ecosystem like this will remain really important. Maybe you can comment on this. Like, I imagine you need to have reselling partners out there and other believers who can talk to clients and say, you can trust this app, you can trust this team, that you're not going to wake up one day and find that these critical financial tools just aren't working anymore.
Yeah, that is actually a very important point. And I actually think that is a bigger concern in Europe from the conversations I've had. The European partners and consultants are less used to the ISV model, I would say, compared to, say, the Dynamics GP world in the US, where in GP, we're very used to the common ISVs. We know them. They've been around forever, hundreds of customers. We know who to call. It's a community. Whereas the BC ISV community and the AppSource world for online is still kind of maturing. So there's a little bit of uncertainty and testing the waters there. So I absolutely agree that the identity and trustworthiness is really going to matter. And the story I tell is in the dynamic GP space, the ISV solutions that I've been selling for 13 years, well, for the last decade, the functionality of those applications is largely the same. But for 10 years, we have been working on improving the product, refining it, reducing the cost of support for the customer and us so that we're not getting calls and emails constantly. So when I get 5 support emails around the same topic, I speak with the developer and I say, hey, we have a trend here. Let's address this. We refactor the product. We add some functionality, some diagnostics, alerts, whatever, and we eliminate those support calls, period. They are gone. And then, of course, like any other system, you find the next support issue that you can refine. So I hope I have that practice and experience to make that happen with the Blue Dragonfly products. And our developer and I work very closely. And we have an explicit rule that if there is anything that we even think might be an issue in the future, we just stop. We talk about it. We say, can we fix this before this becomes an issue for our customers or our support? And we deal with it. And that's why it's taken us longer than expected to really get our first product out. We've been developing all the backend systems to make that happen.
And all the backend systems for other solutions too, so that they all kind of have the same backend.
Yeah. So we have our registration, our licensing, our CRM integration. We have our web services in place. We had to restructure our Azure tenants for security purposes. We have multiple isolated Azure environments now, fully isolated so that, say, an attack or a breach on one does not affect the other. So we had to completely retrofit that. We've started using Azure Key Vault, DevOps pipelines, basically every best practice we can adopt. If Microsoft or someone in the community, Waldo, Eric, someone else says, hey, this is a best practice, we try to adopt it. So that's what our plan has been.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I was considering asking about that. I didn't know how deep we wanted to get into sort of the architectural, but it sounds like you've made a lot of those efforts to run some parts of your solution really outside of Business Central, and is part of that an IP decision, or is it really just pure architectural sort of optimization and that kind of thing?
It's kind of some fundamental requirements. So for instance, if you want to have a registration and license management system, a customer's Business Central tenant needs to reach out somewhere to validate that license. You could go with a static license, but then you lose the ability to refresh or update or do subscription management, right? It kind of limits you like in the on-prem world. So we've chosen to use things like Azure Functions, Azure SQL DB, Azure Key Vault, App Insights, and basically Azure as our platform for our centralized management of resources. And, that's kind of a logical choice for the Microsoft world. And between our developer and I, we have well over 30, 40 years of development experience in .NET and on-prem development. So we are having to learn the Azure side of things, but we're trying to utilize all the best practices we could find to make that happen.
And it is a different world because it is all now cloud-based. So
completely different.
Right. Yep. So rather than, hey, I'm going to email you your registration key so that you can go put it in your on-prem solution, trying to make that essentially more dynamic.
Sure.
Yeah. And there's some great opportunities there. So a customer can register within Business Central in our software, submit that. they automatically get a trial license key. They don't have to pick up the phone. They don't have to call us. We certainly prompt them to if they need any support, but that can be automatic now with Business Central. And that's a great opportunity with the online SaaS platform that was much more difficult to do in the GP world. It was possible, but it required different architectures that it was kind of cumbersome. So we're now able to do that in Business Central, and that automatically feeds our Microsoft 365, CE sales, CRM, whatever it's called these days. And so we're able to have automatic emails to the customer, full workflow in CRM to take care of those things. So really new opportunities that I personally hadn't explored in the GP space.
I want to get your impressions on sort of where you see Business Central headed overall. I think you've hinted at several of them just by nature of all this work you've been doing and the decisions you're making. But as I think I mentioned at the start of this, I last saw both of you at the Directions EMEA 2022 event, which was early November. So pretty much the end of this year, looking into 2023. Is there anything that either of you would sort of identify that you picked up on from that event as really an important, change of direction or evolution in this space that you think will be important? Tanya, do you want to?
I think that, I was going to say, I think Microsoft's, they keep touting that it's the fastest growing ERP ever, right? I don't know if that's the pricing or if it's because the solution is great. I think it's probably a little bit of both, in my opinion. I think the pricing model of the solution is obviously amazing, and the product. One of the things that always bothers me about people who are coming from some of the other spaces is that I still continue to hear that it's half baked, and in my opinion, that is just absolutely wrong. Business Central is a very robust system, and Microsoft is continuing to put their R&D dollars, toward the system, and I don't think that is going to stop. One of the things that Steve and I talk about every day, which we Skype each other all the time, or Teams, I should say Teams, but Steve doesn't like Teams. But what I think we are still both in amazement every day when we find a bug or we think we see something that is wrong. And both of us will go to Twitter and we'll tweet it. And I've had sometimes within 10 minutes, Steve will retweet it, or Waldo will retweet it, or Eric Hugard will, and immediately Microsoft will be on there saying, we see the problem and we are going to have a fix out within 6 hours.
It is truly amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
So I think Microsoft, in my opinion, is absolutely paying attention. They might not 100% pay attention and say BC is the best thing in the world, because they do have, their F&O product, which I know they try to push a lot as well. But I think that with the Business Central product, they need that market space. And I think they are realizing they need that market space. We've been on multiple calls with Microsoft executives, and they do. I feel like they are essentially trying to listen and trying to find out, how do we make this a great product.
And it does seem, one thing that seems a little different is that it's as if the Business Central team, the entire team from management down to the actual hands-on developers, they seem to have a level of autonomy or independence or something that has them participate very actively in the community. So the members of the BC team who are on Twitter, they're really engaged and they're accepting feedback, and we have conversations and threads, and they're listening. And we have other channels for that communication, but the most public one is Twitter. And as Tanya mentioned, we joke that it's a global conversation that is rolling 24 hours a day, that you just post to Twitter with the BC hashtag or BCAL help, and within an hour, you've got someone on some continent responding to you with a pointer or a hint or help.
Yeah.
It is truly amazing.
Yeah, that's really That is amazing. And the point you made about them having a bit of autonomy, I think that is still true from what I can see as well. I mean, I might be seeing signs it's starting to slip away. I think with the growth that they've been bragging about, it does become harder for them to maybe operate independently in certain ways. I think maybe on the management sort of product management side, as opposed to the R&D side, or product marketing maybe is the right term. I was just looking through my notes here. I mean, what they specifically said at the event, and I guess the latest would be, 60% growth in the number of customers on Business Central in the last year, triple-digit revenue growth year over year, and those are different numbers because some existing customers are adding users, new customers are bigger deals, they say, than in the past, and they're also selling more of those extra environments and extra databases and things like that. So they're sort of increasing revenue in different ways, apparently, but they won't say how much anymore. That used to be totally independent too. They used to be able to just show charts, of here's what our user base number is this year, and that's gone. But like you said, it does seem like the R&D team is really, really sort of free to engage with the community. I should say though, Power Platform, you do see that to some extent with product managers on the Power Platform side.
True.
So, but yeah, you don't see it as much with sales or F&O, or CE and F&O.
And we never saw it with GP.
Okay.
Correct.
Definitely, I don't think, and we've all been on GP for 20 years, and we could reach out to some of those, the Terry Healy's and the Desiree Crumbs and those people, right? But we didn't get the response, right? You had to put in a support request with Microsoft to get something resolved. And now I just don't feel like we really see that any longer. I mean, you do have to remember it's a global product too. Whereas GP was more of a US based, BC is absolutely global. As Steve said, you might have somebody in Denmark or somebody in Germany or somebody in Sweden who answers that request. And what is really also cool, I think Steve kind of jokes about it. He goes, I have more friends in Europe now than I have in LA.
It's not an exaggeration. It is kind of surreal for me.
Yes.
And one critical difference that I have personally have not seen anywhere else is the Microsoft and Business Central adoption of GitHub and I'll use it in air quotes, open source software collaboration with Business Central. I mean, it did not exist with GP. As far as I know, it does not exist with NetSuite or Acumatic or anything else, where we can go on GitHub and submit a request, submit a pull request, submit code, submit enhancements to GitHub publicly. And that is amazing for a global ERP system being managed by Microsoft. Could you imagine that 10 years ago?
Right. They did a lot of work, I think, over, you probably know better than me, Steve. I mean, over several years with the Business Central team, going back, before Mike Morton, probably to the time of like Paul White, Marco Perisic, but to kind of transition their R&D into an agile sort of framework, I guess, at scale. I don't know how long that took, but I assume that's sort of where they're at, and that like you said, the ability to lean on tools like GitHub probably stems from all of that, all the work that went into that, and to become sort of a real SaaS-based offering.
Yeah, and their ability to innovate, to enhance, to release new features, to have a rapid release cycle that honestly outpaces the capacity of customers to absorb, but their ability to move quickly and be agile is phenomenal. And that alone, if you say, okay, how is BC competing against other players in the mid-market ERP space? Like I'm not an expert on the other products other than NetSuite, which I've used a little bit, but just the fundamentals of how they're developing this software, I think, bodes very well for the product long term.
The other, I guess, the other thing I think I took away from the Directions event personally, from conversations, was partners like resellers seem quite happy with their outlook for the next year. They seem to be very busy, overbooked in many cases, with projects not even scheduled to start till later in 2023. I guess that's that's a good thing in a sense that those businesses probably have some stability and confidence in what they're doing this year. I mean, I think it's also probably constrained though too. I don't know. How does that play into your plans for this year, or does it?
I would say, well, it doesn't necessarily play into my plans for this year. I mean, we have a lot of customers who are, starting in January, which is kind of a little different than what I'm used to. I'm used to a very busy December. And I think this kind of strange. This is one of the first years that my January, February, March are already booked out as opposed to December. So for us, I feel like, we're just essentially going to then push on, continuing to build our solutions and, whatever else we're needing um, to like per-tenant extensions, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So you'll be spending time with partners with customers.
We actually for our extensions, yeah, actually we are. Yes, I was going to say we do. I was thinking of the different extensions that we have out there. We have some new extensions that we're building for a particular customer. So essentially, we're just working with them in order to, get everything laid out.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a lot of Power BI work too. So on the BC space, so we do a lot of that. So, and I'm seeing more of that because of the people who are going live, probably they may not have the expertise on the Power BI side. So we have the expertise on Power BI.
All right. I'm surprised that I thought finance departments especially tried to lock things down in December and didn't want to have a lot of work going on. But you're saying that typically that has been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I always have people doing a January 1 go live.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever, and we do have a couple of go lives this year, but and maybe this will be a little bit different, is that, they're the ones that we're doing this year are a little bit smaller, which is nice because I'm not spending my entire December getting ready for that. And in this situation, we're not for our implementation side on test team, because I also have test team for the implementation side. So on the implementation side, I am not let's just put it in, or we sell you the licenses and go figure it out yourself. And I feel like a lot of people did that in the very beginning of Business Central. And I feel like we had a lot of failed implementations that we hence adopted, right? And I feel like maybe that's getting better. I could be wrong. I still have some failed coming to me, but we try to say, hey, it's still going to take you 3 months. We're still going to do a discovery. We're still going to go through everything just like we did on GP, with the exception of the installs, right? So we still do all of that same project management and project lifecycle to get them on BC. And I feel like that makes them more successful as opposed to those, pay us $5,000 and we'll give you a solution and go watch some videos and good luck.
Yeah, really, Business Central. If there's one thing I could characterize with Business Central, I mean, it's so multifaceted in that sense. Like there are those customers that do what you just said. Here's 5 hours of consult, or here's $5,000 and some training videos. Good luck. And then there's very complicated sort of 100 plus 200 even seat deals with lots of ISV solutions, probably quite a bit of custom extensions. I mean, and everything in between. All from one product, and Microsoft kind of wants it all to work, with their partners. It's not a simple story.
Yeah, I honestly don't feel like here's give me $5,000 and here's videos. I personally do not like that model, because I think that those are the people that end up being frustrated and end up saying, I don't like the solution. And they don't like the solution because they've attempted to, basically self-implement. So if you could imagine self-implementing GP, right? It's not any different. I know when I self-taught myself BC many, many years ago, right? And I had problems with it, and I'd been doing software for 20 something years. so I don't expect a customer to do that. And one of the really cool things that I feel like us in the GP space, Microsoft saying, hey, we want to take you off GP and get you onto BC. one of the great things, and I felt like I was a little bit of an underdog from the Navision people, was that I didn't know NAV. So I still don't know everything about BC, right? I always fall back on my NAV friends. And, but I can talk the GP language, and the Navision people can't talk that GP language, if that makes sense. So we have a lot of GP customers who are very happy because you can say, here's what you did in GP, here's what it is in BC. And that immediately helps them, and they get it much faster.
Yeah, I can imagine there's some translation needed there for the even for the eager GP customer who's willing to sort of put in the work. Boy, that's a whole nother podcast we could do.
That's a whole nother podcast.
All right, yeah, and but seriously, from my perspective, knowing both of you and seeing you both through a transition from a GP focus to a Business Central focus, I was really interesting and sort of a telling sort of signal for where Business Central was going, that people who knew GP well and had worked with for so long were sort of recommitting their careers to learning this whole new ERP. I mean, it's not, like you said, it's not small. It's not a small commitment to develop those skills.
No, it is a significant investment. And I mean, to anyone who's listening, who feels overwhelmed trying to get into Business Central, I fully empathize. I mean, I've been trying since late 2019, so I'm now on year 3. And although now I do have moments where I'm like, yes, I actually know what the answer is to this question, there are times where I'm like, yeah, I have not even begun to explore this entire realm of the Business Central functionality, and I'm still constantly learning. So it is a long process. It takes time. And, I didn't get into Dynamics GP in 3 months. It took years to learn it and become proficient. The same thing exists for BC, even if you have years of experience with another product.
And he can finally do a journal entry now.
Kind of, but I'm kind of dangerous. I let professionals handle that type of thing, right?
That is true.
Great. Yes. Anything else you wanted to touch on here? This has been really interesting, and it's great to hear all these updates. I mean, you're both, I know, Steve, you said early on, that your sort of approach to business is to try to be, very efficient with your time and not overextend and all that. But boy, it sounds like you're both still going to be pretty busy and have a full schedule in 2023.
Yes, no shortage of things to do.
Yes,
for sure.
And we will be at multiple conferences speaking, hopefully.
Yes. Which, a great opportunity, if you don't mind a plug. We have, Dynamics Con live in May. I don't recall when Summit is. Then there's
Summit's probably
Directions.
October.
Okay, Directions NA is in spring.
It is April.
Okay, and then I think Days of Knowledge in Denmark, that's usually June, July. And then Directions EMEA is later in the year. It's going to be in France, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we have Directions Asia also that we may also be attending.
Yeah, that's a long flight over to Bangkok, boy.
That's one I've never been to myself. Yeah, so let me know if you decide to go. Maybe it'll sway my decision.
You. Yeah. I'm trying to talk Steve into it. I think a lot of the people that you met probably at EMEA are planning to try to go to Asia. A couple of people are so.
All right, I'll keep my eye on it.
Not a terrible place to go, right?
Sure. No, is that a Directions?
I'd love to go back.
And that's a Directions for Partners event. So the same group that runs Directions EMEA runs the Asia event.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Very good. Well, certainly things to keep our eye on. Thanks to both of you so much for joining me. This was fun. We'll have to do it again. Maybe I think we already kind of landed on a possible discussion point for next time.
All right. Awesome.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Steve and Tanya for joining. For more information on some of the projects we talked about today, check out the links in the show notes. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can also follow all of our updates on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.